If you saw my last video, you know that I'm working on placement for the small block in my 56 F100. In order to do that, I'm having to make custom motor mounts, and so over the Jag IFS. In this case, you can see where on the left I built one here, and it's coming straight off of the boxed frame. I tried to give enough angle down here to give it a good level support. I didn't use the Jag mounting pad because the engine mounts don't really line up consistently over it. I decided to mount my engine a little bit passenger side in order to make more room for the steering around the steering knuckles around the headers. And even with this, these are the shorties, the long tube headers, which I pulled out, took up even more space. And even with this, you can sort of mocked it up. This is, I had to go pretty wide still. And this is the bracket that I'm going to weld in. To make the bracket, I first leveled the engine to where I want it to be so that the carb pad is level on top. And then I have it resting on blocks, and I shimmed it in order to get to the exact point that I wanted it to be. So it's actually where I want it to stay in the final position. I looked at several different options for designing the mounting pad and the engine mount stand, and what I ended up deciding on was, as you see in the other side, I'm going to use this steel rod that I cut down to the width, which is 3.65 inches, to fit right inside the motor mount. And so in mocking it up, I'm putting that on first with placement. Then I cut out some pieces of cardboard in order to mock up the different sizes that I want to use in order to determine the actual angles. So these are the two that I ended up with making for templates. So I set this one down here, and then I measured the angle to try to match the other side, because I want the angle to be as low as possible in order to distribute the weight down, and also to give a larger spot, a square to weld it onto the plate here. And then this one up top is almost level. So this one came out to about 21 degrees down, and this one again is almost level at about 6 degrees. So that's the final design that I'm going to do. So I'm going to go cut these pieces out of metal, and then and I'm using 3/16 plate. And then I'm going to cut these out, tack weld them onto the tubing, so it'll hold its shape, and then I can pull this out and then finish the actual welding, and then create side plates to box that in. For simplicity, I decided just to plasma cut the pieces out of the sheet metal. So this is the top piece that I marked off, so I just put it in here and then used my soapstone to mark off the edges. So then this is going to be my straight edge, which I have hold in place, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually cut that out. The plasma cutter I'm using is a Victor Thermodynamics Cutmaster 42, and it works well. I don't know that I've really cracked the code on the right speed and the way to set the tips. It should be pretty straightforward, but I tend to struggle with getting really clean cuts. But I'm definitely getting a lot better on that. So this is going to be a pretty straightforward cut. I do have it cranked all the way up. I'm going to start at the edge and then take it all the way in. And I've already pre-checked my mark there. You can see when I was dragging it, sometimes it kind of caught, and I had to, I think stuff gets kicked up and it gets in the way of the line, and so I had to kind of push through it. Now I'm going to move over to this other line right here. It's the top edge. I'm reusing a piece that I cut the other side out of. So I'm going to line this up, get a good straight edge here. And I tend to put extra marks with the soapstone, so I don't go too far. I can see that bright mark really well. Okay. Now sometimes when I'm lucky I cut well enough that it just falls right out. Yeah. There we go. So that's the bottom piece. I'm going to let that cool down a little bit. And then I'll trace the... So that's pretty straightforward. And then I will trace that's the top. The bottom one's a little longer. So I'll trace that next, and then cut that out, and then start the tack welding. Now this is my grinding station. As you can see, it's still a little warm. I got some edges from that cut, so it's not bad. You can focus on those, but it's definitely not what I want. The top one's a little worse. And then there's a fair amount of dross. There shouldn't be this much if the cuts were done properly. I don't know why I tend to get that much. No telling. Consumables, power, gas, I don't know, speed. So many variables. Anyway, I cut a little, I always leave a little extra because I know I'm going to take it down. So my preferred method is, and I don't have to get these exactly square, so is to put it in the vise, try to get that level, and then use an angle grinder with a flap disc. These flap discs are amazing. If you've never used one, it's incredible how long they last and how quickly they take stuff down. Obviously I've got a bunch of safety equipment. I stepped up to the goggles. These are 3-in-1s that have the seal around the eye from loose ones, and I still get things up into my eye, which is why I'm now adding the mask. I don't know how necessary, maybe you guys can tell me if it is, this is when I'm grinding on the metal, but definitely that smell, and I just don't know what I'm breathing in, so I go the safety route. But I've also noticed when wearing the respirator, or the dust mask, it shoots stuff up into my eyes more. So I think this compounded my other problem. It's not perfect, there's some in there, but it'll give you the idea. I won't get rid of those until I'm down to the final stage. Pretty good. Good enough for now. With a lot of grinding, I've been able to get that bottom piece to fit in, so it sits up against here. And the first time I tried to do this, I tried to spot weld it from the back, and there just wasn't really good room. So what I'm going to do is weld. So the second time I tried spot welding from under here, and that actually worked really well. I can get good penetration, and that's going to hold it in place. Then I can lay the top one on, spot weld it from the top pretty easily, and then I can come in and fill in the welds from the outside out of the car. So I'm using a Miller 211 welder. I wanted to have plenty of power in the case. I wanted to step up to heavier stuff. At 110, it can go up to 316, which is what I'm welding now, but at 230 it can go all the way up to 3/8. I've done 1/4 so far, so I appreciated having the extra power of this. So this is that bottom plate I was just working on. I went ahead and did the spot weld I mentioned onto the bottom here. So you can see it's not the prettiest weld, but all it really has to do is hold this piece long enough for me to take it out and keeps the angle once I move it out. So there's my ground. And so there it is, how it's going to set across the top. So what I'm going to do now is finish cutting the or shaping the top piece so that I can weld it on place also, and then again I can pull it out and finish up the welds out of the car. Okay, so here's the top piece laid in. I'm going to go and just put some tacks on the on both sides up here, and to make sure that it just holds again while I pull it out. I'm going to go and try to film it. I've never filmed welding before, so I don't know how it's going to come out. But we'll just see. I did the tacks a little longer than I typically would because I want to make sure I got plenty of wire in there to spread that gap, since I was coming in not at the ideal angle to it. But it looks good. Looks like they covered real well. So I'm going to go and pull it out and see what it looks like. Actually, let's do it well right now. So this just dropped right off the bottom. Yeah, and the top welds didn't make. So I got to grind those off and do. Okay, so I finished cutting the pieces. So here's the size. As you can see, the spot welds are in place. Remember on the bottom, I came from the bottom down here. So that's ready to go. Then I used this as a template for the edges, which I then cut out of these pieces right here, and then did some cleanup and a little beveling. That way, when I come in here, it's I'll be able to weld them in flat. So this is how the sides are going to fit. So like that, and then this one on top there. Now this one I cut a little short, so I'll have to fill in this tip part with some additional weld. But and then I'll probably won't clean it up. I'll probably leave the welds on there. I just need to do some metal cleanup and then metal prep, and then it'll be ready to actually do the welding. So the gap in here is a little bigger than I would like, but it's probably good. The one that worries me the most is this here. Obviously I didn't cut it close enough, and so I'm gonna have to just fill this in welds, and it'll be strong enough because it's gonna have the welds in the top and the bottom there. So I'm gonna start with some tacks just to have it hold in place so I can remove the magnets. And now I'm going to start filling it in. It's a good weld. Okay, mostly done. Just going to fill in these last two sections. I'm alternating, so I don't put too much heat into one place at a time. So I finished welding it up, but you can see there's a pretty big hole at the top where I didn't close up well enough at the gap. So the easiest way to close in a gap like that I've found is just to use a series of tacks on top of each other to build up the material that was missing. Okay, so here it is, finished up. I had to do some grinding along here to try. It doesn't look real pretty, but so that it would fit between the motor mounts. It's solid in there. So to mock it up, basically it's going to fit right up there. So the engine will be a little lower on top of it. And there we go. And then I'll weld up around the square, the box there, and that should be it. Okay, I've got the motor mount stands completely fabricated, and I used a weld-through primer so that because there's going to be metal underneath there, I wanted to make sure that everything was protected. I cleared the paint off the frame rail, the boxing plate, and also put some weld-through primer on there. And so this is pretty much where it's going to be. You also see that I beveled the edges so that when I put this into place, it's going to hopefully be able to get some good penetration. Here's the other side. Let's see, where is it? There it is. So it's also level up against it, and they're cinched down, not completely just torqued to spec, but close enough they won't move. The goal also was to get the carb pad level, so it's pretty much level. It's slightly off a little bit, but I don't think that's enough to really matter. So next step is just to weld them in, or at least spot weld them in, and then I will pull the engine back out and complete the welding. I didn't do the best job, but they're a little bit more than tacked in. I didn't want to go all the way around in case I need to make adjustments, but I wanted it to be strong enough to test fit the engine and test the quality of the weld. So there's a tack on this side, a little bit longer bead, and then a little bit down the side here. I haven't cleaned it up yet, but again, that's just a test fit. I want to remove, right now the engine's sitting on blocks and shims, so I want to remove those so I can see how it fits. Okay, I pulled out the shims, and the engine is on the weight of the stands. The biggest concern I had was the clearance back there between the pan and the rack. I'm not super excited. I hope it's enough. I'm not super excited that it's going to be, but the engine is on its own weight, so now I'm just going to go ahead and lift the engine out, and then use the and then I'm going to finish welding in, and then I can paint everything back up. So looks good. It's a successful first run. Okay, I pulled the engine out and completed the welds. They're not the prettiest weld, but that's okay. They were pretty strong, and I test holding the engine's weight before I pulled them out, and I think that's going to be good. So I'm just going to clean up the welds a little bit with some seam sealer so it looks better, and then I'll paint over it to match the chassis black, and that'll be done. I can move on to the next step.